October the 9th, we actually presented to the court. So all the feedback went on record and everything. So we moved it forward. It's the people's decree that we all worked on, kind of going to the next level, and we have to just keep pushing. So the CODIS did the best that we could. Once again, we know with the state agency situation and the MPIA and all the other hindrances that keep us from actually being influential in the disciplinary process of the police department is still the same.
Ray understates the importance of CODIS, I'll be honest with you. I mean, the recommendations they made were really incredible. I'm not saying that, look, they're.
No, I mean, in all of our research, it was, everyone that came here is saying until you can separate this entity, it's not gonna work. There was no way, even with local charter changes, to actually be able to hold that entity accountable.
So would it be fair to say, okay, so what you've got basically is a lobbying, organizing kind of document that, like, for the future. But would it be fair to say that insofar as what you do overlaps somewhere, like it doesn't overlap?
No, it doesn't really overlap, but I think if there's an intersection, and let me tell you where I think it is, the consent decree, and this judge is very, very, very interested in civilian oversight. I mean, as Ray just said, we have some incredible limitations. I mean, we can't override Maryland law, and there are a lot of restrictions in Maryland law that the police department or police have been able to manage over years and years and years. Now, having said that, I think what the consent decree does, it requires the city to use their best effort. That doesn't mean that, you know, we can't punish them if they don't achieve it, but we can punish them if they don't take steps to at least try to get some legislation passed that would alleviate what I consider to be some of the more substantial areas to transparency and to how you deal with bad police.
So I'm getting the impression you all get along, that's all.
Oh, for sure.
Don't be misled. Don't be misled.
Yeah, we hate each other.
So this is the Peace Prize, Toby. We have to work together. We still hold each other accountable. And I don't know, I just think at this point, where we just have a nominee for commissioner happening, they are party to the consent decree where we have to, once again, leverage our relationships to get the work done. So hopefully, sitting here, I see that we have to collaborate on community engagement because we can't call this town hall. The town's not here. So we have to actually work together, and that's the new, the CPP is like committed to the engagement. I'm willing to leverage my personal relationships to make sure people are getting involved in the process. So it's one of these, like, so we gotta not be box checkers or anything like that. We gotta actually have real town hall meetings where the town is there, the people are there, and the voice is not limited to, I'll say, the invited few. We gotta get this word out here that this is happening. If you look back to the DOJ's findings report, so 92% of discretionary stops happen to Black people. 44% of those stops happen in two neighborhoods, Sandtown and Upton. We're in Upton. Those people should be here because they are directly impacted.
And it's worse than that, Ray, because let me tell you what else is going on. Even for example, you look at what they call vehicular stops. When the Justice Department did the study, they just picked a random 1,000 stops because there are probably 300,000 stops over a period of time. In terms of African Americans, when they were stopped and searched, I want you to figure out how many times did they find contraband out of their guns or drugs? Like 3%. When you stop whites, same 1,000, still not, it's 8%, almost 9. So it's almost 3 times the number. So I mean, that just goes to show you that there is a disparate impact on how people of color it's probably more than blacks, it's probably Hispanics as well, but that's what we're trying to fix with beginning with policies, and the next step will be training, which is what we will be going into next year, probably the year after. Oh, thank you. So anyway, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I mean, it is a stark problem, it's not a social.
And that's the way we see it, is we're coming into a new session with new personnel. We gotta seize the opportunity to kind of gain momentum. We're in a crisis situation for real, and it's a lot. Because my office is 2 blocks up the street on Pennsylvania Avenue, where most of these stops and arrests happen. And the situation isn't really touching that street yet, where we have to get these people that live on Fruitville Avenue, Division Street in Pennsylvania, and Fremont to be in this meeting, where Toby is, you guys are great, you know, I love you, but that's really,
Stopping
that's
getting
just,
risky?
right, they're not really getting stopped in both.
Don't laugh,
And it's-
they might stop it.
It's a trust building process.
Only when she comes to our meetings on Pennsylvania Avenue.
It's a trust building process,
Right.
multiple fronts. We're asking a community that has no reason to trust the police department, to trust that we can change something that they have no reason to believe can be changed. And so that's a really big uphill climb. I think the judge's new favorite analogy is the mountain that we're trying to crest. And so we are still hiking far up that. And community feedback in this whole process is deeply important so that we understand the work that that's being done. But if my child is shot tomorrow by a police officer, I don't really care about my policy work or my training work. That's not gonna be what I care about. And so that's some of the big struggle that we have here, is that we have people deeply hurting who have had years and years of slights. And we have a lot of work to make them even wanna be in this room. And I think that's one of our biggest challenges is in the major class through now.
She's absolutely right, but having said that, we have a job to do, and she is absolutely right. I can understand it, I understand the frustration, but in order to get this thing done, fixed on a sustainable level, you gotta start at the beginning. And,
Yeah.
you know, people are gonna be upset with us if they don't see progress fast enough, and it's understandable. I mean, you know, look, let me tell you, this is not just a 10-year issue. I've been in this town for a long, long time. I practiced criminal law in this town in the 70s, and people may think it's different. It was just as bad in we had something called the Stop Squad that was pretty much in this same neighborhood on Mosier and maybe it's Mosier Division. I mean, they would just come up at night. You know, kids would stand on the corner, come from different directions, slam on the brakes. You know, sometimes the kids would throw dope out, sometimes they wouldn't. They sometimes planted on them. But this is not a new story. It's been going on here for a long, long time, and it's going to take a long time to fix. But you got to start somewhere, and our job is to stay focused. You got to build it. If you want it to last, you got to start at the beginning. You got to train police officers, and then you got to hold them accountable.
All at the same time, engaging residents that are going to have to live and continue to work in the city in meaningful ways so that reformations are sustainable.
That's why we have Shantae and Jessica.
And that's why I have people like Ray, who I work really closely with and who I talk to and ping every single time I've got concerns or questions about what community engagement looks like, what it should look like, ideas around what those things should look like. And he is just one of many who are doing really powerful work in the city that I lean on heavily to make sure that engagement is attainable.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm like on the live.
Can you tell us we didn't get to meet you before we started. Can you tell us what your name is, please?
Oh,
if you're
Deborah.
okay? Say again?
Yeah, Deborah.
Deborah.
Elfenbein. And I was gonna ask, oh, well, one of the ways I learned about the meeting here was a flyer that was in a car on it, just nothing in paper or on the telephone poles or, I mean, I was wondering how did you get the word out? It was sort of just almost by accident that I heard of it
I mean, with all due respect.
Oh, no.
I was just wondering,
Yep, so, so we first, talk about community engagement around scheduling, right? I think that you heard Darnell mention earlier that, every single month we're going into a specific district. In the warmer months, we are doing what we call corner crawls, where we're literally going block to block, we're walking and talking to people. But as the temperature has started to shift, we thought that it made sense to bring folks indoors. And so, we did create a flyer that we socialized on social media. We have communicated to press to let them know when it was going to happen, which is why you saw Fox 45 kind of in the back at that point. He left. And then we also employ a partnership that we have with the Youth Empowerment Society, which provides services to homeless youth, and we employ them, right? So my organization employs them to flyer the area that we're going to be in about a week before we're going to be in that area, dropping information on cars and in people's door stoops, obviously not violating any federal law around putting stuff in mailboxes, and not violating city law by posting anything on poles, right? So, so we're very careful about what we can do and what we can't do in a way that doesn't violate law.
But even the language was maybe a little unclear. We're delighted to be here and concerned about this issue, but we had we're sort of motivated to come because we had a crime incident a couple of weeks ago, and so just the language of the flyer, you know, in terms of getting more turnout, I think wasn't at least entirely clear to me. But
Can you say more about that, James?
well, just so that I have vague understanding of the consent decree, but not really, so that just the language didn't maybe address sort of concerns on the ground. So do you know what I'm saying? Like that, in terms of just getting butts in seats, like
So
letting
not to
people
put you
know
on
this
the
is
spot,
about
but
what's
how
happening
would
to
you,
you.
how would you make it better? And let me say this too. We want a candid conversation, okay? I mean, one of the nice things about having a small room, you can't embarrass us, okay? So if we're doing something
In a
we
large
think
room,
is
you can't
wrong,
embarrass me.
you can
Right,
embarrass
embarrass.
us. But I mean, we need feedback because like I said before, this is the beginning of this process. We know we don't know all the answers. We're doing the best we can, but we're gonna screw up on occasion. And we need you guys, if you see us screw up, tell us, or if you think we can do things better, tell us. So in terms of this, I mean, you've got the group from these three who are really good at this community engagement, but they're not perfect either. But
So maybe if the language were more clear about, that if you're having unpleasant police interaction, this is the place rather than, so that this seemed a little bit like preaching to the choir, like people who are already informed were gonna show up.
Thank you. I appreciate that feedback.
although I didn't know either what it was about, I actually am ignorant of the consent decree. I thought it was, with the change of administrations, that it wasn't in place. Because that was partly what I'd read in the Sun, but that's one just basic thing.
So you understand now, it's a court order, it's in
Yeah,
place,
I
it
do
ain't
know.
going anywhere.
That's really great.
Well,
That's
and
really great.
if we rewind back, that's one of the reasons why when Mayor Pugh took office, it was very important for all parties to have signed that document very quickly before the before the change in administration happened at the White House, right? So that a federal judge could then order the consent decree as a matter of
Well, no, you're
and so
you're
it
right.
can't be
can't be
undone
undone.
at this
That's
point,
great.
right? That's why
Yeah.
we have checks and balances across the federal, executive, legislative branches, right? And
Right.
so, as Ken mentioned earlier, even with the departure of Jeff Sessions and his last attempt at making consent decrees obsolete.
Just a statement, that's all.
Yeah, ours was already in place, already signed by a federal judge and appointed as the court's agent, and so we're here until it's done.
Let me tell you the other thing about this particular consent decree, which is probably a little different than most, because I actually think this is probably the best consent decree that's ever been drafted. It's not because I had nothing to do with it. I mean, Ray was on the ground. He was part of the process when this thing was done. this consent decree probably took from other consent decrees that have been around the country. This is the last one that's been put in place. So it's had the advantage of being able to look back and see, what works and what doesn't work. But the other thing that's so important here, and and some people may not like this, but the reality is that Mayor Pugh was called into the courtroom before the judge would sign this decree. And he basically said to her on record, before I sign this, I need to make sure that you're going to provide the resources so that we can get compliance. Now, some people are going to say, oh, you're spending too much on the police department. I can tell you right now, their technology is so poor that it actually affects good policing. I don't just mean being able to lock up bad guys. I'm talking about we need technological resources to be able to go after bad police. We need to be able to look at police who may need some counseling, before they become bad police. We need good records to be able to figure out how many people in Upton are being stopped on a daily basis, whether they well, I was gonna say race, but I guess that wouldn't be an issue in Upton. But if you take some mixed towns, we still wanna be able to get the right data, because at the end of the day, for us to determine compliance, and this is what's so important about this consent decree, it's not based on how we feel, it's based on data. And the data is gonna have to come from a legitimate source, and you just can't look at paper documents that's floating around. I mean, I was over at the academy again yesterday, but I was over there in March, and they've got boxes of stuff. It's not even cataloged. And for us to be able to do our job, to figure out, whether the arrests are being done based on some racial reason or not, we've got to have data to do that. And the only way we're going to be able to do it right is we're going to have to have the technology. But that's not going to be cheap.
So that's an example of where some of your recommendations overlap with what they have to do. I mean, in terms of transparency, but I just have a question or a suggestion about this. Because I know you have a lot, your main mandate right now is to find out what people want, what their interactions are with the police, what the experience is, neighbor to neighbor to neighbor. But I assume you also want to recruit, like activate support on behalf of your monitoring and whatever forms it might have in the future. And what's odd to me, but I know that some people are really busy and they want to go to meetings and then they don't go to meetings. And so, and I don't know what this, I'm connected up with a bunch of people who this would be number top 3. Police reform would be top 3 on their list. But they don't show, obviously they're not showing up. I'm wondering if, like, your short executive summary had a number of action items on it for your reform. If you had, here's what we're doing now, bullet point 1, 2, 3, or here's what we would like to see the community doing. I know you don't want to be too directive right now, but for people who would be interested in what kind of support you can use right now.
Can I ask you a question about, should we be more directive? I don't know. What do you think?
If I had a sheet of paper that was 2 pages long that said, this is who we are, this is what we're doing, here are key things right now. We'd like your support or come to your meetings. I want to go to I just retired, I'm going to go to the indivisible meetings. They meet in Hopkins. They're very progressive. They're apparently very active. I could just bring the material and say, come on. These people have been active out here in Baltimore now for 2 years, or ever since Freddie Gray, ever since the consent decree, but they need support. They need people to come out. And I don't know if it would help, but if I had the specifics on my part, I was going to go find the document you gave me. I forgot to do it before this morning. If I had something like that for me, a quick, just 2-pager with the key bullet points, I would bring it to these meetings. There's also the Jewish United for something, and they may do state legislation around fair wages, but I would just bring the documentation to the meetings. Right?
Right, so, just to check in on a couple of things, Toby. So, and Darnell, I don't know if do you have our schedule in the back?
Yes, I have.
And so we do generate a schedule every single month about what we're doing, what we're currently working on, based on the monitoring plan that we have to have put in place with the judge. In addition to that, we also provide an executive summary, not only on our website, but we're happy to distribute that wherever you guys think it makes sense to distribute it around what our quarterly progress is to date, right? So what we were looking for BPD to change and or implement from a policy perspective, and what they did and what they didn't do, right? And so our reports very clearly speak about what the requirements were associated with transporting people in custody and what BPD had to do in order to come into compliance associated with constitutional policing, right? The monitoring team has performed random inspections of the vehicles to make sure that the vehicles are outfitted with video cameras, that there are separation of folks who identify as different genders, that there's separation of youth or juveniles from a legal perspective from adults, that there are proper restraints and seatbelts in those vehicles now. We've also done a fair amount of investigation around what happened in Harlem Park, and so we have documented what we thought went well and where we had serious concerns about what happened in Harlem Park. And so absolutely willing to share as much information as we have. Please don't forget that our website is a resource. Our website houses every single thing that we file with the court, every single schedule that we have. We post on our Facebook pages and on our Instagram pages, and we know that a lot of the folks that are impacted by unconstitutional policing aren't necessarily following us on social media or on our websites, which is why we have neighborhood liaisons who have a responsibility going into communities to have those conversations. With that said, we're always looking for more folks to get involved in disseminating information, in raising voices to us around what we aren't aware of. My phone number is publicly accessible, and I often get phone calls around places that I need to go in order to have conversations with folks or to document what interactions are looking like live and on the scene. So absolutely going to take you up on that, Toby, and get your contact information so that we can make sure that that you can be an extension of our voices. And for anyone else that is interested in being an extension of our voice, we would welcome the amplification.
And if any of these groups were interested in how they wanted to come speak for us,
Sure.
Absolutely.
Do it all the time.
We do. So we've met with groups such as Youth as Resources, Disability Rights Maryland, Leaders of the Youth of the Struggle, Boundaries Coalition, the Baltimore Algebra Project, and the list goes on and on and on. So we're absolutely willing to. And I think we just met with the Institute for.
They're having this out at another, but we are meeting with them.
And I think
You had it at the beginning of the.
Yeah, but we didn't have enough time to do
Got
it.
it.
What they're dedicating their life for us.
Awesome. Great.
But I want to piggyback on something Shantae said because I think it's so important. I think it's a large part about education, and both of you spoke into that a little bit, is that the consent decree didn't go away. What is this consent decree? How does that actually function on the ground? Why does giving us your feedback even matter? So those are things that the more we can tell people, as you said, fill these rooms so people understand, the better chance we have about hearing the stories that we need to hear to make sure we're looking through the right lenses when we are moving through policy, when we're moving through training. We don't want to recommend things that aren't community-driven. Community-driven response is the cornerstone to good society. And so this is what we really need to do.
I want to take a minute, if I could, we're Facebook Living this, and I want to address a question. I'll address your question in a second, Alvonia.
Yep, Deborah. Oh, I just was wondering if you can distribute to libraries. The branches are all around the city, and both information as well as meetings. Every library has a meeting room that's pretty low.
You're absolutely correct. So the organization that I am the executive director of is a nonprofit in Baltimore City. It's called the Baltimore Community Mediation Center. We are at the corner of Green Mountain 33rd, and we have a partnership with the Enoch Factory Library. In fact, we provide our services for free in every single library. And so many of our neighborhood liaisons do have weekly hours where they're sitting in a public library. In addition to that, we've got partnerships with the Department of Parks and Recs. And so we have access to all of the recreation centers as well. I will say that given the number of team members that we've got right now, we are moving at a very deliberate pace around how we get the message out to 600,000 plus people as efficiently as possible. And Ray and I have had a pretty lengthy discussion about what next steps looks like around meaningful engagement. I've also had conversations with Sergio Espana of the ACLU. I'm scheduled to have a conversation this evening with Lawrence Brown of Morgan State University, and I've met with a few other folks. So I'm really looking forward to making sure that we take all of the feedback around community engagement into consideration and pivot where we need to. Alvonia is following us on social media. She happens to be one of our neighborhood liaisons, and she indicated that she was just in an association meeting last night, and one of the residents stated to her that nothing was going to change. Ken, do you want to address that, and then I'm happy to piggyback.
Well, you know, that is a hurdle that we have to overcome, that being the, not really the monitoring piece, even though we are part of that process, but that's a hurdle that the police department is going to have to take steps to overcome. I understand people's frustration. I understand why people would feel that way, but, you know, I love this city, and I want to live here a long time, and I'm not going to take a defeatist attitude. My view is that you've got to figure out a way to fix a bad situation. And our job is to help the police department do that. We have some of the best experts in the country on my team. We're working very, very hard to help the police department get through its deficiencies. I think this first year, for the most part, the policies look, they're 1,000% better. You know, this is the easy part, to be honest. As hard as it was to do the policies, you know, we're a long way from compliance, and the next 2 years are really going to be tough, because this is where we get the training and the implementation. It's going to take a lot of resources, it's going to take a lot of time, it's going to take a lot of effort, but this can be done, you know, and the advantage we have is we have a federal judge who oversees this, who will tell the city or the police department if they are slipping back as we see it. You know, there are sanctions that can be employed. So we've never been in this situation before. So I mean, I understand why people, you know, feel frustrated and feel hopeless, but you can't do that.
So I think that what I'll add is that transformative change takes time. And transformative change is not sustainable if you attempt to bulldoze the change. It is only if you understand what's going on organizationally, as a leader or a group of leaders, that you understand whether or not you're dealing with a strong or weak culture, whether or not you're dealing with a positive or a negative culture, and doing appropriate levels of assessment around what changes need to be put in place in order for that culture change to be sustainable. It requires tackling things incrementally and using what I'd like to say is a tugboat mentality, which is very different than a bulldoze mentality. Sustainable change, from my experience as a leader, isn't sustainable when you try to push someone into a direction. They have to be aware of the fact that a change is necessary. They have to have a desire to change. And that's at an organizational level, it's at an individual level, it's at a city level, right? And so I do personally believe, as the community engagement liaison, that we wouldn't be here from a consent decree perspective if BPD, and I think Michelle Wurzberger, who's the head of the consent decree implementation unit at BPD, says this better than I do. If things were sunshine and roses at BPD, we wouldn't be dealing with a consent decree, right? And so there are some major reformations that have to happen over there, some major policy and procedural changes, some major differences in how community engagement happens in order for residents to even begin to feel willing to engage in a way that works to build trust. And so, Alvonia, I would ask that you communicate to the association folks that you met with last night that we understand the frustration associated with thinking that things are not going to change. And that doesn't mean that we have the opportunity, that we should stop the work. There's no cure for cancer right now. It does not mean that we're not going to stop looking for a cure for cancer. And what's going on in the relationship between BPD and residents right now in Baltimore City is cancerous.
Are there timelines?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yes.
Very rigid timelines. I mean, we are going into our second year. We've been on the ground for about 8 months in terms of actual work. We were appointed in October. It took about 3 months to do a monitoring plan. We're required under the consent decree to do a monitoring plan each and every year that we are around. And in that monitoring plan, we have deadlines. We set, when certain training, this year, when policies and use of force need to be done, when policies and search and seizure need to be done, what you do about misconduct.
Okay,
police
and what happens when timelines aren't met?
When they're not met, then a lot of things can happen. So far, they've met.
I know a lot of.
They have met the deadline. Well, the judge has the power
Right.
to do anything, including holding people in contempt of court. Now,
Right.
we're at early assessments now, so, what I think, if he were to hold someone in contempt, it's not gonna be because they didn't meet the deadline. He will chastise them, I think. Yeah, well, even if they're not, he's gonna give them freedom to ride at. Where you're gonna have the issue is down the road when we start having the implementation issue. And that's what I mean, when you have policies and then you have the training, and then you begin to hold these officers accountable for what they're supposed to do on a much tougher. Not that we're not holding them accountable now, but they should be much better in 2 or 3 years than they are today. So if they're not making the progress that they need to make, this city will stay under a consent decree. And they don't want this. I mean, it's really something that people in the department, they don't want to be under a consent decree. Nobody wants to. So until they, the consent decree will be in place. Detroit's had it for 10 years.
I hate when we reference other groups and how long they've had consent decrees, because it makes me feel like we speak into that space of this can't get done, but it can, and it will. And, I believe strongly from what I've seen, that there's also a culture inside the Baltimore Police Department that does want to change, that does want leaders on the ground that coach them and help them learn in real time, that doesn't want their partner to be their partner one day and their boss the next day and then back to their partner the day after. That's confusing. Imagine if your desk mate was your boss on Tuesday and then your desk mate again on Wednesday and then your boss again on Thursday. How would you ever know how to function with that person? So I think there's a culture inside that's also looking for someone to kind of whip it into shape so that they understand what they need and they understand how to get the help they need. And that's not to defend the Baltimore Police Department, but rather to say that we're hearing it. We're hearing that the things that we're putting into place kind of give hope across that as well. If there's hope going into people who are enacting the police department policies, then that shows that there's a chance that culture can change. Culture's tough. We know it eats policy for lunch, but we can work on this, and that's where we're at the bottom of this mountain, climbing upward. The timelines, though, I want to say, are the most rigid in this consent decree of anyone I've ever seen, and I've worked in consent decrees for some time now. I am excited about the timelines and the judge's accountability to them. None of the people who face the judge on a monthly basis want to be downwind of his disappointment, and they're working on that. So that's hopeful.
Let me follow up on what Jessica just said. There remains in this department, because we're not gonna whitewash anything. You still have a culture of corruption at some level, probably in that mid-level. I think that the younger officers coming in really, really wanna do well and mean well. And what we have found over the first year is that, for the most part, there is a will to do this right. The real problem that we see with BPD in the city is what we call capacity. That is the ability to do it, whether it's because of resources or because they just don't know. I'm gonna give you an example with their technology systems. We recognize this early on. We have experts who look at this, and they said, look, these folks don't even know what they don't know. And so they were required to go out and hire an outside consultant at not an inconsiderable sum to come in and look at their system and say, okay, we know you don't know what you're doing. We're gonna show you the plan that needs to be done. And they paid for it, and now that's being done. And this what we call the technology plan will be out in December. That'll be the first step towards rebuilding the technology system. Same thing with staffing. Somebody paid for this study, thank goodness. I think the Police Foundation They paid for the study. It's a good study, and the study doesn't show anything we didn't already know, but it documents it with data. But the plan now is being done based on that study. Now, one of the holdups, of course, is we have not had a permanent police commissioner. You can't have a permanent staffing plan until that commissioner buys in on it. So now we have someone, we expect that staffing plan to come out in February.
So a couple of things, just one final piggyback on that. So one of the key findings from the technology study is that Baltimore City Police Department has over 200 different technology systems, and none of them are connected. Right, so imagine attempting to get empirical data from systems in order to inform policy, inform change, inform legislation, inform advocacy, and not being able to get real-time access to it, not being able to just run a query and saying, I'm looking for all of the stops in 21217 between this period and this period, go. And you can't, right? So that's a big issue. I think that the other thing that speaks to the fact that Judge Berdar is a no-nonsense judge is that in our last 2 public hearings with him, he very clearly said, I do not want to see another organizational chart change for the Office of Professional Responsibility. That goes to Jessica's point of, I'm your boss, I'm your peer, I'm your boss, I'm your peer. And he stressed how important it was to him that leadership, repeatedly, that leadership be put in place so that there is someone who is solely accountable for making sure these reformations are implemented.
This judge looks at a three-headed, I'm gonna say monster, technology. No, it's technology, misconduct, and the third, I think it's probably staffing. But he's looked at those 3 as being key to everything else. I mean, that's not to suggest that the other areas aren't, because they're all equally important. Quite frankly, as I look at it, stop searching and arrest and use of force, where you actually have this contact is really something that we have to pay attention to. But you can't really do the right drill down on those areas until you get these other things straight. So leadership for him is important because you need some. So this is a police department. It's a paramilitary organization. You know, police officers follow orders. If you don't have a good top person at the top to dictate culture, that culture is not going to change. So that's number 1. You're going to have the technology to fix it. And again, the third thing is you got to get a handle on misconduct. And what Shantae is saying is so true. In fact, we've seen a few changes, not big stuff, but one of the things they used to do in the internal affairs area, they used to do something called detail, which means they would take an investigator out of that unit, send them out, sometimes, you know, for reasons like solving murders, and sometimes going to a parade. Well, that has 2 bad effects. Number 1, you're taking an investigator out of service so that you may have a very serious problem with the police officer who might kill somebody, you know, and you're in a situation where that investigation is being delayed. The other problem you have when you allow that kind of system to stay in place, you send a bad signal to the rest of the team, so to speak, because if it's suggested that the commissioner and the command staff doesn't view that department as being that important. And so when you do that, and you're dealing with misconduct, which is something that ought to be at the top of the list, and our view was when the Commissioner DeSouza actually did this, he came in, and within a matter of weeks, he eliminated that practice. We thought that was a step forward. So anyway, that's kind of what we are.
You've been trying to speak. Oh, it's really
No,
fast.
it's okay, it's really good, because then I have more comments and stuff. One was, it's really great to hear you describe it as a paramilitary force, because I don't think enough people do that, that's always been my thing. But I was also gonna talk about the slowness of hiring. Well, I don't mean to judge it, but I was wondering if you could address the issue of it being a while since it's been a permanent police commissioner.
Sure.
I mean, what is,
I don't know what took so long. I mean, maybe you do, I don't.
I think it was a bureaucratic process. and I think it was an intensive search. I also think we're asking someone to take up a police department under fire, and possibly at a career-ending point. That's an important point. But I think we also wanted to see. You have some good spots in here, so I don't want to overtalk you. So I'll just stop. I'll let Shantae have the floor.
Oh, no worries. For those that weren't able to make the hearing, the last hearing, we heard directly from the city solicitor. We heard directly from acting police commissioner Gary Tuggle, and we learned that there were well over 50 applications for the job. That there was even international interest.
Yep.
Right. And so imagine you running your own business and having 50 applications that you have to go through for what is essentially the head of your security for your business, right? Making sure that you pick someone who has a demonstrated track history associated with everything that is what security is about, but in addition to that, shifting an organizational culture, recruiting quality people, reworking every single policy that you have and creating new ones, figuring out what the training program would look like associated with that, managing disciplinary issues, right? So imagine just as an individual needing to take on that responsibility of going through 50 plus applications. Whittling that down to folks who you believe are most appropriately suited for that role, and then needing to make sure that you go out and do your due diligence associated with those folks, right? The proper vetting, given the number of police commissioners that Baltimore City has seen just since 2015, right? And making sure that you, I know this is plastic or vinyl and not wood, but get it right,
Yeah.
right? While at the same time, continuing to try to move the organization forward while you're doing that search, right? Now, I'm sure there are plenty of other reasons why it took a long time. And I can't speak for the mayor. I don't work for the mayor. I can't speak for those folks that were a part of reviewing the resumes and the qualifications. I can't speak for the folks that were part of the vetting process. The monitoring team doesn't play any role at all in the hiring or firing, quite honestly, or promotions or any of that within the Baltimore Police Department. None of it, right? So our job is to make sure that we're looking at best practices around the nation as it relates to policing, and bringing that information forward related to staffing, employee assistance, demotions, promotions, leadership practices, all of those pieces. But that question is one that would need why it took so long, in my opinion. It would not be right of us to even attempt to answer that in its entirety, and I would offer that's a question that should be directed to the mayor.
Okay, so I have a couple of things. One is, it's really great to hear details like the 200 technology systems not interacting well. That's the kind of thing I find is really useful, and it goes. The other thing is defeatism, to me, this is what my feeling is easier than engagement. The only thing that's easier than defeatism is anger. So that's me, I'm from New York, so that kind of is that sort of culture there. And also the active civilian review board in New York, which has its difficulties, but has power. So that's just where I'm coming from. The idea of building engagement, to me, I just feel like, so I'm wondering, so I'm nervous about doing this because I feel like I'm
Don't feel nervous.
more
Just spit it
confrontational.
out. Doesn't matter.
But the idea of being incremental is frustrating to me because it feels depressing. So that's how I think of defeatism as being
But-
pressed,
but
and
let me
that's
say
why.
this, because I do understand, but the problem is this.
Oh, I'm sorry, is your question finished?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Oh, thanks. No, go ahead.
No, I thought- yeah, I thought I
No,
understood you.
I do.
If I'm telling you, I do,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, because
Yeah, no,
sometimes
no,
I
no,
just
it's
say.
fine.
What I was about to say, I certainly understand the frustration, but there's only one way to do this right. I mean, you know, if you're gonna, look, I hate to steal the judge's analogy, but this department is in such bad shape, you can't take a paintbrush and paint it and say it's fixed. This department needs work from the ground up. Now, if you wanna go in and put a Band-Aid on something, yeah, you might be able to do something for 3 years, it may last, I don't really know how you would do a police department without building it from the ground up. But the bottom line is, there's only one way, in my judgment, to do this. You've got to start, in a department this poor, you've got to start at the bottom, you've got to take your time. And, you know, when I say take your time, I don't mean just laying back and doing it, you know, it's like a slug. I mean, you got to do it in a deliberate, that's the better word. We have to do it in a deliberate way. But you got to do it, you got to build it up. You got to start, it's building blocks. You got to do policies, training, supervision, accountability. I mean, if you don't do it that way, it's not gonna last. And see, the monitoring team, whether we're here 3 years or 5 years or what, we're not gonna be here forever. This process and this adventure, and that's what this really is not designed to go away when we leave. It's really designed to last for quite some time. I mean, why would people want to get into this with the idea that, okay, it'll be good as long as democracy? Because we do see things happening that are good because we're here. You know, I know with Harlem Park, for example, one of the issues there had to do with, well, we found a whole lot of bad stuff. I mean, they were searching people illegally and doing all kinds of stuff. But the real problem there was they didn't have what they call an incident command staff. So you had Commissioner Davis walking in and out with politicians walking in and out. They weren't even keeping track of who was coming in and out of the area. And that's a problem in and of itself. But there was no real central command staff to give the orders in terms of how this thing should be handled. Everybody knows, you know, a cop was shot, and it was horrible, it was a tragedy, and we know when police are shot, you know, everybody gets into this hyperdrive, and it's understandable. And that's where you see the worst of the violations of people's rights. But what we have taken out of that Harlem Park, we look at it now as a learning experience, and we have, because we're here, we look at it, and we require the department to kind of do an assessment of what happened in Harlem Park, and they're now retraining themselves in roll calls. And what does that mean? Let me tell you what that means. We had a shooting 2 or 3 months ago on Vine Street where a guy was killed. I don't know what the total outcome is, but I can tell you this. There was a command staff in place. It was running a much better way. And so my point is, while we're here, we know some things are going to follow in a structured way. What we don't want to see happen is when we're gone, they go back to the old days. We don't want to see another Harlem Park. So that's kind of my point to you. I mean, I want you to be confrontational because I'm going to be confrontational.
Okay, so I will say that part of it is I'm not really asking questions, I'm sort of throwing.
No,
So my reaction.
Can I piggyback,
Sure.
here, Deborah, if you don't mind? So I guess the first thing is, given my role as the executive director of the Mediation Center, we don't believe that conflict is positive or negative, right? So we believe that it's opposing views and that richness comes out of those sorts of conversations. So I don't want you to have any concerns about being confrontational. The other piece of this is, and I often speak in analogies only because I guess that's how I was taught. If we think about the Baltimore City Police Department, going back to the judge's first analogy of it being a house, right? I often think about the house that my husband and I bought about 10 years ago. Built in 1913, right? Moved into this house, loved it from the outside, knew that we had some work to do, got in there, cracks all in the foundation. Foundation a mess after we got there, right? Water coming in, just cracks all over the place.
Leak.
The roof was new, so the outside of it looked really nice and shiny. They put siding on it, new roof on it, that sort of stuff. It wasn't until we got into it that we saw the structural damage, right? So let's bring that back to BPD. Since 2015, we've gone through Commissioner Davis, we've gone through Commissioner D'Souza, we're now dealing with an interim, until yesterday we were dealing with an interim commissioner, Gary Tuggle, and now we're dealing with Joe Fitzgerald. And
Assuming he's confirmed, which is
Correct, assuming his confirmation by the council, right? So, the analogy is this, that any leader you bring into an organization is your building's foundation. That if that person cannot come in and very quickly, like in the first 90 days, come in and learn everything that they need to learn, right? Clarify that learning, figure out what quick wins look like, and figure out what organizational alignment and change strategies need to be in place, then the foundation is gonna continue to be, that it's gonna continue to bring order. And so when we say incremental, from my perspective, it is, there's a new leader ideally, right, if he's confirmed, in place that serves as that foundation pour. If you think about the pour of a house, when they pour the foundation, it takes 2 weeks for it to cure. And in the right temperature settings, all that sort of stuff. And then you build the frame, right? In this analogy, the frame continues to be what change management needs to happen, what cultural shifts have to happen, what resource changes have to be made, who do I need to get rid of? How do I figure out how to recruit the people that I want to recruit? Who do I promote? Who do I figure out? Like all of those pieces become a part of the structure that the folks that are working for you then start to see what the culture is going to become, right? And then you go in and do all the pretty fancy building and stuff. So that framing, from my perspective, along with the foundation, are where the policy work that we have started to, that we're almost finished going through would be beginning. Because if all else fails, you have policy to fall back to if there's ever a question about what you're supposed to be doing and what you're not supposed to be doing. After policy creation comes the standard operating procedures and the training, right? So this is what we expect of you, patrol officers who are on the ground, and it trails all the way back to this policy that is rooted in our culture as defined by our leader. Does that make sometimes I do analogies and they only connect with me, so I wanted to make sure that made sense. Ray, did you have something?
Well, I just wanted to kind of point out one of the issues that we should be identifying right now as we're going into a new leadership phase where we can, is the fact of outreach and dissemination where, like Ken said, the timeline is stringent. So really, I find myself still being invited to meetings and the majority of the crowd, I have to give a history of the consent decree, what we did in this process, how the monitors came about, and like Ken said, we're year in. Things are happening where I'll say No Boundaries was a kind of unique entity in this whole piece where we were able to commit to the process. So we
You
were
got it on the ground.
right, and we were able where you talked about the militarized police force, which is something we addressed in our report. The Office of Innovation actually partnered with us. So there's like 7 No Boundaries people now that work directly with the Office of Innovation to change recruiting practices. We've actually been through the whole cycle in this year. Because we were like in this process, and that's the issue, is we're only in 2121. We had a huge writing for advocacy piece, which is Toby is a part of, where fact is 40% of public input, actually 41 point something percent of the public input throughout the consent decree process came from No Boundaries Coalition members, mostly residents of 21217. So really, it's a matter of outreach and where our capacity is limited to a nonprofit organization, but this is what we're going to take into the city, because if No Boundaries can have 40 residents from 21217 commit to this process, there are 15 councilmatic districts, 9 police districts that can all have 25 or 30 people, and then we have a genuine community-informed process.
Yeah.
Right now, the fear in community is that this is done. Okay, we had a town hall meeting in the Central District, and that's what we have to change, is we actually have to start engaging, and that's the whole process, you know, Shantae talked about, and that's what we're trying to do as the new commissioner. I think the earliest he can be confirmed is January 14th.
Is that the date?
I think.
It starts Tuesday, right? I mean,
Right.
it comes in Tuesday.
Tuesday. So, no, yeah, Tuesday.
Yeah, Tuesday.
So we kind of have to put this mechanism in place, so now we have, once again, a new start. And we need to engage everybody possible, so at one time we'll do this history, we'll talk about where we've been, where we are, and what's the next steps. And we need to kind of see where we fit in, how we can be an asset to this process, and then move forward. I think we have to have what I've been saying is an intentional outreach and engagement effort so we can progress. We've had so many starts and stops since this process began, from everything from Trump getting elected to Sessions wanting to, everything that's happened in our process. We can't look at it like, okay, we signed this thing, I don't see any change. Because like Shantae said, 3 years ago, we didn't have cameras in every way. I've been arrested many times. I've never had a seatbelt on me in the back of one of those things. So that is changed. Really having a monitoring team that we can converse with is changed. But we were in an oppressed state in this community with the police department for years. And now our job as advocates is to get the word out that, look, we got a monitoring team that we can present our concerns to. We have a DOJ that's our representative in this actual court case. I think people don't see, because of history, I can't blame the people, because of history, there is a diminished hope in the community, and it's a trust building relationship. It's starting way over, so it's going to take years. But what we have to recognize is we are in the midst of change. 20 years ago, you think 6 officers are going to trial for killing somebody in the van? No, that doesn't happen. So there is no book. We're writing the book, but we have to have our narrative.
We'll get the full 50 years for planning evidence on it. That used to go on all the time.
Exactly.
Nobody ever went
We
to
have
jail.
actually convicted officers in the past 3 years. Can you look back?
In the last
that
year,
don't happen.
right, in the last year. I mean, they've got
that
30
hasn't
years
been
since.
happening. So we're in the midst of change. I mean, we're in a real violent state on the ground where I live even. It's pretty bad. But we have to do what we can to keep influencing the change. We can't give up. If the few people that still have hope give up hope, then who's leading the fight?
Yeah, if I can piggyback on what you said, because you made so many important points. In 2014, after the shooting of Michael Brown, President Obama created a task force on 21st century policing, and I had the privilege of being an active part of that and one of the principal writers coming out. And one of the things I found out while we were going nationally for 3 months to hear from every single source we could was it was so important we were finally having this dialogue as a nation on the forefront, and that we were going to create something that could walk a little bit afterwards. In the midst of creating the report and writing it and putting it out to the nation to say this is what 21st century constitutional policing looks like, this is how police departments should run, Freddie Gray died and Baltimore was turned upside down. And I was standing in a room watching the coverage, and I was very emotional. I was exhausted. It had been 90 days, the hardest work I'd ever done, and now I was watching. It wasn't ready yet to filter down to Baltimore, and I was devastated because all this work I was doing was exactly what Baltimore needed, but it wasn't going to get there yet. And one of the president's staffers found me and looked at me and said, "Today the dialogue starts. Tomorrow the change will happen. You have to hold strong here, and Baltimore has to hold strong." That's where we're at. We're in change-making spaces. And Ray being here and talking into this process is even a change from last year. He might have told us exactly where we're going a year ago. And he might
He
still.
still does.
He might still.
He still does.
See, that's great to hear, because the idea of being confrontational is scary. I mean, the idea of just not being receptive, but to give opinions that aren't always pleasant, that's, for me, really good to hear. That that's
Let me tell you the honest,
possible.
God, I would much prefer to have, I'd rather you give me the criticism. I don't really give a damn about the good stuff, because I can see that for myself.
Okay,
You know,
then
what I'm,
about
yeah, please.
what's happening with the union and the idea of the Bill of Rights? Has that been addressed? I mean, is that being
Not
talked
really.
about?
There are a couple, look, we don't, we have no control over the collective bargaining agreement, but there's one, probably two good things that happened when the contract was ratified Monday and Tuesday. And again, I'm not suggesting this is the end all be all, the silver bullet, but we now have 2 civilian members who can vote at trial courts. I think that's a big, it's not it's not the answer to everything, but it is a step forward. The other thing is they've changed that work schedule, which to me, not only did it screw up probably the overtime system, and I don't know extra, but I can tell you this, if I'm a police officer, I'm working 20 hours, because that's what happens. They would require these guys to do overtime. They draft them. You work 15 hours, on a Saturday, and you've handled 6 or 7 different, bad issues on some street. After 15 or 16 hours and you confront somebody, there is a strong likelihood that you may very well lose it. And I'm not there's no excuse for that, but the bottom line is those people, these men and women are human, and be young or old, if you don't have the right work schedule, you're putting these folks, and then you're putting us in harm's way. So to me, those were 2 improvements. I mean, I'm not, I don't look at things in terms of like your great fix, because there's no such thing, but I like to see progress. And so I think those are 2 things that show progress.
No,
And
that's
point of
huge.
fact that new work schedule will start January 6th.
Oh, thank you.
Can I just make one
You got it.
point? If you are gonna actually come to existing organizations, like, let's say, MRIA or a congregation.
We'll go wherever we're
Yeah,
invited.
yeah, exactly, that's what I heard you say. One thing I would do, these organizations are already all civic minded or at some level on your side or whatever it is, that, you can provide very short informational background, maybe with a backup of a page or 2. And also, so there's like, and then you're gathering, you wanna know how people are feeling. But I would always have a third component, which is like actionable items. Here's what we, just a simple little thing. Here are our main priorities for the next 6 months. If you wanna help out, what you do? Just give them something to do.
And we're really excited because I think we're going to have action. I don't think we had a lot with the policy writing, beyond coming here and giving us what you want to say.
Well, just we support your policy that you just.
I let me rephrase that, we did not have a lot. But what I was trying to say is that we have moments coming forward, the community can volunteer to sit in on trainings, they can sit in on interview boards. Any community member, we just need to pick some. So this is a really great opportunity to be able to put that out there.
My other question was in terms of the patrol officers coming into the department. Are they required to live in the city?
No.
Who are they? Is that something to work on? I mean,
Well, let me say this. I think the staffing study is a work in progress. I think one of the things that the former commissioners had come to some recognition that some of the so-called standards are really not relevant to being a good policeman. And so we need to get rid of barriers that have nothing to do with police work. And so I think that's part of the progress that's being made. Now, I can tell you just in terms of numbers, last year I think was the first, it wasn't great, but at least it broke even. I think they had whatever people left, they had the same amount of people that they hired. Not a good thing because the department is like 26% down in patrol, which is that's bad. But their recruitment numbers, and I looked at this a couple of weeks ago, and they've got new recruitment ads and new recruitment process in place. They have a target of 25 a month. They're getting about 15. Now, and they're not meeting the target, but I venture to say that if you'd asked me this 3 years ago, they were probably getting 7 a month. So we're making progress. It should get better. In terms of whether folks live in the city, that's not a decision that I have an answer to. I think you need good police officers.
I would also say though that we are seeing we are seeing city residents be, encouraged more to apply.
Yes.
Right, and so, while not a requirement, ideally you're policing the neighborhood that you live in, right? Or, policing is a strong word, that you are a part of helping with public safety associated with the neighborhood that you live in. And so we have seen an uptick in residents applying for those jobs. We've seen, BPD make, some concerted efforts associated with folks that failed the fitness tests, right, by hiring the trainer from the Ravens team to kind of come in for 30 days and help those folks that pass the other portions of the test to figure out like activities for getting them physically fit so that they can then become police officers. We know that Baltimore City for a long time has had the Explorers program, which works directly with youth in schools that aspire to be law enforcement officers. The Mayor's Office of Innovation we work really closely with because they're working on what recruitment looks like in a way that brings residents to the forefront of that work. We've had the benefit of partnering with them and local community-based organizations to pilot an interview process for hiring police officers that would involve residents and not just employees of the police department being a part of that interview process for them. And that work continues to make sure that we really have a true model of community policing at the end of this, and not a paramilitary implementation.
Let me follow up.
We're looking for guardians, not warriors.
Right. And, you know, I say this in many places I go, you know, while the police are a critical part of it, you can't police your way out of this. And so, for example, this is where we need public support. I mean, there are folks out here now who are willing to put up money, for example, to encourage would-be police officers to live in the city. I mean, I don't know where it is, but that to me is a good step forward because I'm not giving any opinion whether they should be in the city or not. I do think that it's helpful to have police officers who understand the communities that they live in, and so I think.
Is it $2,500 taxes?
Yeah, I mean, but you got all kinds of different things that are being done to try to incentivize
Right.
folks, and that to me is
So
a
not
good deal.
mandated, strongly encouraged.
But it needs to be pushed by, that's why you guys are so important. I mean, you're important for a lot. Selfishly, I want you here because I want to steal your ideas. But secondly, I also want you to go out and help sell some of these things because people respond to public, I won't say pressure, but, well, it is to public pressure.
Sure, that's fine. Well, I would love to see more, I don't know what the ratio is, and I don't know whether I advocate that we should be required to live in the city or anything like that. I do think if 2/3 of the force lived in the city, I don't know what the ratio is now. I mean, this is a city you love. If you live here, you love this city.
Yep.
I don't know, if you live outside it, maybe you're afraid of it, or maybe you just don't understand. I don't know, but this is a great city. We love it to death.
You know, I'm not gonna cast
It
aspersions.
needs a lot of things.
I'm not gonna cast aspersions, but I mean, I have judge friends who have told me, goes back a few years, but I'm not even gonna mention the county, or the state, but there are counties and states where we have a fair number of police officers that drive down every day to work in the city. And their mindset is that they are entering Vietnam. That the folks in the city are the Viet Cong, and their job is to handle these people and to get home safe. And so that's what you need to eliminate. I don't care where you come from, but you have to be enculturated. And that is part of the consent decree, by the way. Whether you live in that county or not, you need to be enculturated, to understand the city you live in.
Maybe if we had a target, because if you have a critical mass of experienced police officers who live here, they affect that other
Yeah,
group.
it does.
So I've lived in Baltimore City my entire life, right? I love this city. Like, I bleed this city. I love this city. And I think that it's really important personally that the majority of our law enforcement force live in the city. But as Ken already mentioned, it's not required. It's not something that's in the consent decree. I wanted to check in here because I wanted to quick story about a police officer that I talked to, because we're talking to officers and residents, right? And in a lot of cases, officers are willing to tell us stuff that they aren't necessarily telling other officers or command staff. So it's important for us to have balanced, neutral perspective around what's happening in communities and in BPD, so we can figure out how we bring about the change, the shift that we want to see happen. So, had a conversation not too long ago with an officer who has been working in the same district for 6 years. His family did not live in the district that he worked in, but he did live in Baltimore City. He was at a giant supermarket one day getting Pampers for his young son, and someone walked up to him in an aisle and said, "You're the officer that arrested me." Right, and so nothing popped off, if you will, at the supermarket, but I want us to take the time to really think about the human side of this too, right? Because we're all people first. Strip down the blue uniform, strip down the perceived attitudes of our youth and saggy pants, strip down the colors of our skin, all of that, right? And those are absolutely factors, right? So me saying strip it down doesn't make them non-factors, but we're human first. So imagine yourselves in a supermarket where someone that you apprehended and locked up is walking up to you when you're not even in uniform. You're there to get Pampers for your kid. And having a conversation not only with yourself but with your family around, is it safe for me, right? So I tell that story in order to kind of bring a human piece into why some officers may not want to live in the city, and at the same time for us to all figure out how we lead with our humanity in a way that community policing doesn't, or that policing doesn't result in police officers not wanting to be here, right? So how do we get to a point where community policing, where we are a community, where we're a tribe, we're a village, and it's a different conversation. It could be, you're that officer that arrested me and I turned my life around.
Well,
You're that officer that didn't arrest me, saw that I was doing something wrong, gave me a diversion opportunity, and here's what I'm doing now. Or you're not the officer that arrested me at all. Like you and I grew up with you being my mentor, and so an arrest never happened. So just really like bringing all of those
and
pieces
we have the
together
same
around
issues too, 'cause
the
we're
Baltimore
victims
that we
of
want to
crime.
see.
So as victims of crimes, it's hard to keep the balance when you're thinking about police reform.
It's a deeply complex issue too. When you think about the level of the experience for an officer, what Shantae just shared, added to them, there was once, and I want to say once because I'm really excited about the new trainings coming forward, a culture in training where every time as an officer you went into a scenario and you screwed up, you died in training. Imagine if daily or hourly you died in training. What kind of trauma does that start from day one as a cadet?
That's in training.
That's in training. So that's not the culture of training that we're moving towards. That's shifting away, and it already has in a large part in Baltimore's police department. But you don't have to die every time you misstep to the left versus the right. Rather, we can have a conversation about all parts of it, teach through it, and then keep going. Training doesn't need to traumatize you that then puts you in a warlike state going into deployment,
Yeah.
because that's what it feels like. So compound what Shantae was mentioning about being a part of the community with a training that makes you feel like the community is going to kill you every time. You've got to, that's a lot of things we have to break down. And I'm excited to say that in the training space, what I've seen so far, they're breaking that part away. And that's real important.
That's also why it's important that residents be a part of the training scenario.
Absolutely.
Right? Because imagine your life thinking that the police are gonna kill you every day.
Exactly.
Right? So it's both sides to that, right? So being a part of the scenario-based training. So if I'm an African American woman walking down the street and a Caucasian American officer is looking to stop me, what should happen? Is this a voluntary interaction? Is it a non-voluntary interaction? So what are the scenarios? And being a part of those conversations not only help you understand what your rights are as a resident, do I even need to stop? Like, this is voluntary. Like, do I even need to stop? Do I need to say hello because he said hello? And humanity goes back to, yes, I should say hello because somebody spoke to me, but being aware of your rights, being a part of the training process together, in my opinion, brings us back to that human piece. Like, this is what that would make me feel like, this is what that would make me feel like, here's what protocol dictates, here's what humanity dictates. Like, those things aren't oppositional, right? They don't have to be oppositional.
Can I just say, the interesting thing about the supermarket thing that came to mind is also teaching the officer what it means to be accountable. So it's not just being acted on by the civilian, as it were, or resident, but that it might, the person, the police officer might come away with, so I need to look at and own that this person approached me with some hostility or with some openness and memory that was good. But the idea of just what is being done to me as an officer, I also have to think this is an opportunity for me to learn how I'm seen and what I'm doing, and that maybe I handled that arrest really well.
Absolutely.
And so that's going forward, then that's positive reinforcement. The other thing is we got a serious supermarket visit here, where we have to walk to Save-A-Lot. That's the closest thing. That is a big problem for me, is that, you know, it makes it dangerous to walk. And the idea of, I mean, dangerous in that, what I'm getting to, the idea of being stopped or do I have to stop is at this point, it's dangerous not to comply with everything a power figure, an authority figure does. I mean, that's what we're taught at this point, is you have to do everything. Because you might not make it even if you do, but you definitely, this idea of saying what my rights are, you know, and you can't do this, that's just not what we're taught, is that. So, again, you get a sense of my sort of,
I do, and quite frankly, I'm glad you bring that up, because that's exactly the way the consent decree is requiring the police department to train itself or to retrain itself. Look, one of the biggest mantras right now is called de-escalation. You might see, there was a newspaper article about the Hippodrome and the guy yelling how Hitler, and you can agree or disagree with what happened in that incident. Some people say he wasn't treated harshly enough, and that may or may not be true, but the point I want to make is, I think this is the beginning of the outcome we want to see. Not necessarily with that Hippodrome incident, but you want to see police officers use better judgment and think about de-escalating the situation. Why make the situation worse? That's not a good example, because I mean what he did is, you know, appalling. But in your case, what we want, police officers trained who, if they see you walking down the street, maybe you are doing something that maybe you've got an open bottle of Colt 45, which is what we used to do when we were growing up. Well, there's no need to lock you up. You know what they do in the white neighborhoods in the county? They take that bottle and they just pour it down the sewer, and they might take the kid home and say, Johnny, go home. You know, in African American neighborhoods for years, you know, if you got caught with an open bottle of Colt, you were arrested. I mean, that was all part of the zero tolerance. So the bottom line is, part of the training now is to get the police officers to think about de-escalating first. We're not asking them to put their life in danger. Somebody's got a Uzi, you know, pointing, and you have to do what you have to do to protect yourself. But there's no need to do incredibly difficult stuff on something that's.
I just have to laugh, you know, you live in Boston. So in the summer, 5, 6, 7, 8 people of various ages and maybe whatever, they're sitting around drinking on the lunch stew. I mean, we're always.
What do they drink now, by the way?
I don't know about Colt 45, but whatever.
I don't think they sell that anymore.
No, this is the kind of neighborhood where you're not gonna get arrested for walking down the street drinking whatever it is you're drinking.
To your point, Deborah, about feeling like you don't have a choice but to comply when you're dealing with someone who has a perceived position of authority over you, you're absolutely right, right? So to Ken's point, de-escalation, an understanding of what the policies and procedures are associated with how you engage with a resident is going to be really residents of Baltimore City begin to see shifts in what that engagement looks like, will mothers like me stop telling her two black sons, do everything that they tell you to do, so that you can come?
I want to speak into some work that Shantae did that she's not self-promoting, but I think is really important. Where she worked with the police department and the Department of Justice to create scenarios around the policy changes that we're making, so that instead of us just helping you can read the policy, decipher it, and understand what the change was, there's actionable out scenarios that you can go witness at monthly engagement meetings that the CDIU, the Consent Decree Implementation Unit, is putting out for communities. They're advertising on our website, and I think, are we putting it on our stuff at Election Day? I don't know if we are.
No.
Okay. And well, I can help you connect to where to find it. But if you go to those, you can see the scenario, a policy change told to you in scenario base, which helps, I think, people understand. In your situation where you're talking about voluntary stops, is just one that they've been doing. And I think it's a really informative session for community members that want to go see it. It allows you then to call upon your own experience and ask questions of the police department. They've had police majors usually at every one. So I would encourage you to engage in that. One of the things that's important about our work is that everybody has their lane. This is stuff we want to see them doing and doing better and growing. And so the police department's doing it. And so we'll make sure you connect you with some of that. You might enjoy engaging in one of those spaces to learn as the policies are shifting in that way.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, you guys are great.
Thank you to each of you that joined us on Facebook Live. If you have any other questions after watching or rewatching this video, feel free to post them on this thread and we will respond.
So will you sort of have the links we would need to get to these various things? If I wanted to report to another meeting.
And I was being polite.
Oh.
I'm sorry.
My wife is
Is this
from
a signature?
Long Island. She grew up in Hempstead.